Everyone talks about the professor's genius, Berlin's elegance, Tokyo's sacrifice, the professor's plan. But there was one person in that building who held everything together, one person who never broke, one person who led without a title, loved without conditions, and worked without credit. And the show killed her in season 4. Like she was expendable. She was not. Today we talk about the only real hero of Money Heist, Nairobi. Money Heist is full of people who called themselves heroes. The professor called himself a revolutionary. Tokyo called herself a fighter. Berlin called himself a philosopher of resistance. They all had titles, they all had speeches, they all had moments where the camera lingered on their face while dramatic music played and the audience was told, this person matters. Nairobi never had a speech about herself. She was too busy actually doing things. And that is the difference between Nairobi and every other character in this show. While everyone else was performing heroism, Nairobi was practicing it, quietly, consistently, without asking anyone to notice. This video is about finally noticing. Before she was Nairobi, before the green jumpsuit and the factory floor and the speech that made an entire fandom stand up, she was Agata Jiménez. And Agata's story before the heist is the most important context for understanding everything she became inside it. Agata was a mother. She had a son, Axel, who she loved completely and absolutely. And the state took him away from her. Not because she was violent, not because she was abusive, because she was poor, because she was struggling. Because the system looked at a young woman without resources and decided she was not enough. That decision, made by bureaucrats in an office who never knew her name, destroyed Agata's world. She turned to crime after that, counterfeiting. Not because she was reckless or thrill-seeking like Tokyo. Not because she had a god complex like the professor. She turned to crime because the legal world had already failed her completely, had taken the most important thing in her life, and she had nothing left to lose by stepping outside it. This backstory matters enormously because it means Nairobi walked into the Royal Mint of Spain already knowing what loss felt like, already knowing what it meant to have everything stripped away by forces larger than yourself. And instead of making her bitter, instead of making her cold like Berlin or reckless like Tokyo, it made her ferociously, protectively human. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed, so she never dismissed anyone. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, so she made everyone around her feel seen. That is not a character trait. That is survival wisdom earned through genuine suffering. Now, let us talk about what Nairobi actually did inside the heist, because this is where the gap between her contribution and her recognition becomes impossible to ignore. Nairobi ran the factory floor. While Berlin was making speeches and the professor was running contingencies from a safe house in Tokyo was creating problems that needed solving, Nairobi was managing 68 hostages and a full gold printing operation simultaneously. Think about what that actually means. 68 terrified people. People who had been pulled from their normal lives and locked inside a building surrounded by police. People who were angry and scared and unpredictable and desperate. People who needed to be kept calm enough to work and safe enough not to riot. Nairobi managed all of it. Not with threats, not with guns pointed at faces, she motivated the hostages. She learned their names. She understood their fears. She created a functioning working environment inside a hostage situation, which is so absurd it sounds impossible until you watch her do it and realize she was simply that good at reading people. She also kept the crew together. When tensions ran high between crew members, and tensions ran high constantly, Nairobi was the one who stepped in. Not with authority she had been given, with authority she had earned. People listened to Nairobi not because the professor told them to. They listened because she was almost always right. And here is the detail that gets overlooked entirely. When Nairobi discovered that Denver had been ordered to execute Monica, she was the one who sat beside Moscow on that bathroom floor while he had a panic attack. And it was invisible because that is how emotional labor works. When it is done perfectly, nobody notices it at all. Here is something the fandom almost never discusses. The hostages in the Royal Mint were safer because of Nairobi than they would have been under any other crew member's management. Berlin saw hostages as variables. Tokyo saw them as obstacles. Denver was too emotionally unstable. Rio was too young. Moscow was too gentle to maintain any authority. Nairobi saw hostages as people. And that distinction, as simple as it sounds, was the difference between a hostage situation that descended into chaos and one that somehow, against every reasonable expectation, maintained a thread of humanity throughout. She advocated for the hostages inside the crew when decisions were being made that put hostages at unnecessary risk. Nairobi pushed back, not loudly, not dramatically, firmly, with the quiet authority of someone who understood that the moment the heist stopped treating human beings like human beings, everything the professor claimed it stood for became a lie. She was the conscience of the operation, not the professor, who built the philosophy but sat outside the building. Not Berlin, who recited the philosophy and then ordered executions. Nairobi, the woman on the factory floor with 68 frightened people who chose every single day to treat them with dignity they had not been promised. That is heroism, not the dramatic kind, the daily kind, the kind that does not get speeches written about it. Nairobi came back for the Bank of Spain heist. And the first question worth asking is why? She had money from the Royal Mint operation. She had her freedom. She had survived something most people would not have. The smart move, the self-preserving move, was to stay hidden and stay safe. But Rio was captured, tortured by the CIA, and when the professor called, Nairobi said yes. Not because she owed the professor anything, not because she was reckless like Tokyo, but because loyalty to the people she loved was more important to her than safety for herself. That decision cost her everything. Inside the Bank of Spain, Nairobi stepped up immediately. She took charge of the hostages again. She kept the operation functioning when it should have collapsed multiple times. She was shot and survived. She recovered and went straight back to work. And then Gandia happened. Gandia, the head of security, escaped his restraints and took Nairobi hostage. He used her as a bargaining chip. He held her at gunpoint in front of the entire crew, and then in one of the most brutal moments in the entire show, he shot her. Nairobi, who had survived being shot once already, who had fought her way back from the edge, who had held 68 people together with nothing but her personality and her presence, died on the floor of the Bank of Spain while her crew stood around her unable to do anything. The show gave her a death that was sudden and brutal and deeply unfair, which was intentionally or not completely true to her life. Agata Jiménez had always been treated unfairly by systems larger than herself. The state took her son, the heist took her life, and in between those two losses, she spent every day she had making the world around her more human than it had any right to be. The fandom was devastated when Nairobi died. Social media broke. Clips went viral. People who had never cried at a television show found themselves genuinely grieving a fictional character, and that reaction, that scale of collective grief, was the most honest thing the Money Heist audience ever did, because it proved something important. People knew. Somewhere beneath the excitement of the heists and the drama of the love stories and the spectacle of the professor's plans, people knew who was actually holding that show together. They felt it every time Nairobi was on screen. They felt the warmth and the strength and the realness of her. They just did not say it out loud until she was gone. That is the story of real heroes in real life too. The people who hold things together rarely get recognized while they are doing it. The recognition comes after, in the grief, in the sudden awareness of how much lighter everything felt when they were there, and how much heavier everything became the moment they were not. Nairobi was not the professor's plan. She was not Berlin's philosophy. She was not Tokyo's sacrifice. She was something rarer and more valuable than all of it. She was the reason the people inside that building, crew and hostages alike, remained human beings throughout the worst experience of their lives. And the show killed her in season 4. Agata Jiménez deserved better. From the state that took her son, from the professor who recruited her into danger, from the show that discarded her when the writers needed a dramatic moment. But here is what nobody can take away. For every moment she was on screen, Nairobi was the best person in the room. Not the smartest, not the most powerful, the best. And in a show full of people performing greatness, that quiet, consistent, unglamorous goodness was the rarest thing of all. The professor had the plan, Berlin had the suit, Tokyo had the speech. Nairobi had something none of them ever managed. She had the people. And that, in the end, was the only thing that ever actually mattered. If this video made you see Nairobi differently, or if you think another character deserved the title of real hero, drop it in the comments below. Nairobi was the heart of Money Heist, but in Berlin's world, there is a woman who had Berlin's heart, and she destroyed it completely, Camila. Next video. See you there.